Hey everyone, my name is Nick Wignall. I'm a clinical psychologist and the founder of The Friendly Mind, a free weekly newsletter where I share practical, evidence-based advice for emotional health and resilience. Today, I'm going to talk about why the concept of stress management is actually bad for you and how you should be thinking about dealing with stress instead. I want you to imagine that you've shown up at the emergency room having just broken your arm. You're talking to the doctor and they say, "We took x-rays, your arm is definitely broken, but no worries. Here's a bottle of Vicodin. Just take a couple of these painkillers anytime your arm starts to hurt and you're good to go." Now, if a doctor said this to you, you would say they were crazy, right? This is an insane way to treat a broken arm because you're not actually treating it. Painkillers just make the pain go away, but they don't do anything about the actual problem, which in this case is that your arm's broken. Here's another scenario. Think about this. Your spouse comes to you, kind of sheepish, guilty look on their face, and they say, "Honey, I've been wanting to tell you this for so long, but I was just so afraid. And, I just need to say it. I am $80,000 in debt with credit card debt just over the past year, and I don't know what to do about it." Now, your spouse says that to you, and then you come back and say, "Oh, don't worry about it, honey. It's not a big deal. Just, get a new credit card and start paying off the old debt with the new credit card." Again, this is an insane way to address the problem of debt because you're just accumulating more debt and more interest, and it's just going to make your money problems even worse. Just like treating a broken arm with painkillers, trying to pay off credit card debt by going into more credit card debt doesn't begin to address the real problem and actually makes it worse, despite some short-lived relief. Now, as ridiculous as these two examples seem, and they're pretty ridiculous, what's wild is this is how most people deal with the problem of stress, the problem with stress management. In a nutshell, here's the problem with stress management. Stress management encourages people to treat the superficial symptoms of stress while ignoring the underlying cause. Here are a couple examples to illustrate. After a couple months of really chronic stress and exhaustion, maybe even burnout at work, you finally decide, okay, I can't take it anymore. I need to do something about this stress. So you go and you go up to the mountains to some fancy spa and you spend the weekend at the spa and you relax, you get a facial, I don't know, walk around in nature, whatever people do at fancy spas. And within a day or two, you actually are feeling more relaxed, less stressed out, and you're starting to feel, pretty good. When you return to work on Monday, you do feel a little bit more relaxed, but pretty soon you're right back to the same level of stress because you haven't actually done anything about the underlying causes of the stress. The fact that you're a chronic people pleaser and never say no, or the fact that you work 12-hour days, or maybe the fact that you have terrible sleep habits. Or take another example. Maybe you're the kind of person who you actually feel pretty good at work. You don't feel that stressed. You have a good job. You like your coworkers, all that kind of stuff. Where you really feel stressed is when you're at home because, unfortunately, you have a spouse or a partner who's incredibly critical and demeaning and frequently just downright mean. Now, you've tried everything you can think of. You've read all sorts of self-help books about stoicism, and you've tried to get them to go to couples therapy with you, and you've been praying for them like crazy that they'll have a change of heart. And yet, nothing seems to change. Their behavior isn't really changing, and you continue to be stressed out when you're at home. Here's the thing to see. In both of these scenarios, you're trying to change the effect without addressing the underlying cause. In medical terms, a doctor would say you're treating the symptoms, but you're not dealing with the underlying pathology. And in psychological terms, what we'd say is you're trying to address the stress without acknowledging and dealing with the stressors. Stressors, what's a stressor? Well, let's talk about stress and the different terms we use to describe different types of stress. So stress is the most obvious one. Technically speaking, stress is a physical response to a real or perceived danger to your survival, right? Basically, it's your fight or flight system kicking in, and it has all sorts of effects. There's obvious physical effects, like you get muscle tension, or maybe your breathing rate and your heart rate go up, things like that. There can be cognitive and emotional effects too. You might start worrying a lot more, feeling more anxious or afraid, things like that. A stressor is the thing causing the stress in the first place. So in our first example with the broken arm, pain, right? Pain's just stress. That's a sign of something else going on. In this case, like your bone being broken. That's the stressor that's leading to the stress and the pain. And then the last term we need to think about is chronic stress. And chronic stress is where you experience stress, but on a kind of unending basis. Typically, something happens, there's a stressor in your life and you get a spike of stress, but then you deal with the stressor and the spike of stress goes down. Chronic stress is when your stress level goes up, but it never actually comes all the way down. Maybe it comes down a little bit, but then it remains at sort of this mild to moderate level all the time. And the thing about chronic stress is no matter how much you work to address your stress, to try and manage your stress, if you don't address the stressors, it's not going to matter. You're going to stay stuck in chronic stress. Now, many people end up chronically stressed out because they don't understand this distinction between stress and a stressor. Specifically, they think if they're working hard to manage their stress, that's what they're doing, and that should be helping. Of course, it doesn't, which is part of the stress, right? They're incredibly frustrated because everything they're doing to manage their stress, while it might work kind of temporarily in the short term, it doesn't actually work long term. And so without realizing it, what's happening is people are sort of rationalizing or avoiding dealing with the actual stressor and instead, quote unquote, working on managing their stress. Of course, it's not at all surprising we fall into this. Managing your stressors is a lot harder than managing your stress. So chatting, for example, with your really sympathetic therapist about how stressful and hard your job is, that feels a lot easier than, for example, initiating a really difficult conversation with your manager or your boss about your workload. Or even more significantly, perhaps, taking real steps to think about and plan out leaving your job and finding something else if the culture and work environment in your job just won't change. Here's the thing though, there's actually something much more systematic going on here that's contributing to this problem. And that is most of our culture, especially the culture of mental health and wellness, stuff like that, even though they're very well-intentioned, a lot of people in that profession, they encourage this coping attitude toward emotional difficulty, including stress, which is if you're stressed out, what you need are more coping skills and you need more insights into why you're so stressed out. And if you have enough coping skills in your tool belt, enough stress management techniques, then you'll be really good at managing your stress, and then stress won't be a problem for you. The thing is, people believe this, which is a problem because if you put all of your energy into managing your stress, ultimately, like we talked about, it's not actually going to work. But even more importantly, that's all time and energy and resources you're not putting into addressing the stressors, the things that are actually causing the stress. Now, at this point, I want to make a really kind of subtle but careful distinction, which is there's a big difference between stress management techniques and the stress management mindset. So there's all sorts of techniques you've probably heard of for stress, whether it's deep breathing exercises or mindfulness meditation, stuff like this. Those are all fine. Like there's nothing wrong with those things, those techniques. What matters is how you use them. And if you have a stress management mindset, if you think the way to deal with stress is to apply techniques to the stress itself, to the symptoms, you're never addressing the underlying cause. So it's not that deep breathing is bad or that mindfulness meditation is bad. No, those things are great when used appropriately. The real problem with those techniques is that they end up being kind of an unconscious excuse for not addressing the stressors that are leading to the stress in the first place. All of which to say, if you're really serious about addressing chronic stress in your life, it's essential, absolutely essential, that you really ask yourself, what are the real causes of my stress? What are the stressors in my life? And what would it take to start addressing those instead of just putting band-aids on the stress itself? Managing your stressors means being assertive. So if you do really ask yourself this question carefully and you really think about not just what's the stress that I'm feeling and what could I do to temporarily feel better, but what are the stressors in my life? What are the things actually leading to the stress in the first place? Almost always you will identify 2, 3, maybe 4 things that are real problems in your life that you are avoiding, and then instead you need to acknowledge honestly and start addressing assertively. For example, if you're stressed out at work, a big part of the problem may be that you are a people pleaser and you're terrible at saying no. You avoid saying no. So you essentially train other people in your work at your job to give you more and more and more work, to overwork you, because you're not willing to assertively say no and set a boundary on too much work. Or if you're chronically stressed out at home because you've got a jerk for a spouse or partner, you probably need to get a lot more assertive about what you are and are not willing to tolerate. And once you've stated that clearly, you're going to really have to do the hard work of enforcing those boundaries that you set, being unwilling to tolerate, your spouse being super critical of you or demeaning or abusive in some way. And you're really going to have to back that up. You might even need to make a serious change to the nature of the relationship itself. Or let's say you are chronically stressed out around your family anytime you spend time with your extended family. That might mean that you need to be more assertive about spending less time with them and more time with people who actually fill up your tank instead of draining it. If you're chronically stressed out because of, say, poor sleep or insomnia, what that might mean is you need to start being more assertive with yourself about, maintaining a consistent exercise regimen, because exercise really helps with sleep quality. Or about bad habits in the evening that disrupt sleep, like too much alcohol or eating too close to bedtime. Or one more example, let's say you're chronically stressed because of money and personal finances. It might mean you need to start being a lot more assertive with your partner and initiate some very difficult and uncomfortable conversations about money and spending habits. The common thread through all these examples is that if you really want to address the root causes of your stress, you need to start being more assertive about the actual problems in your life. What that also means is you have to resist the temptation to fall into the stress management mindset with all of its coping skills and stress management techniques. To kind of sum this up, it's like, do you want to feel better for 20 minutes? Sure, do some deep breathing exercises right now. But if you want to feel less stressed long-term, you need to start addressing the root causes of your stress, your stressors. And almost always, this means having the courage to be assertive about what you really want and need, and being willing to say no and set boundaries on the things that are not good for you. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you want to get more tips from me on how to deal with stress in a healthy way and build emotional strength and resilience, I write a free weekly newsletter that goes out every Monday morning called The Friendly Mind, and I would love to have you join us.